How's it going? I hope everything is coming up roses. Welcome to Shelf Improvement. I'm Cheryl. Thanks for letting me keep you company while you're doing whatever it is you're doing. Walking the dog, doing the dishes. I want to talk about what I read recently. Last time I talked about 6 books, and in this video, part 2 of 2, I'm going to talk about 4 books. So let's chat about the books I read in August. I read 2 historical fiction books. I talked about The Giver of Stars in the last video, and I also read The Lost Apothecary, which I heard about over at Leanna's library. The Lost Apothecary is about Nella. She's an apothecary living in the 1700s who helps women kill abusive men, like husbands, brothers, fathers, probably landlords, the occasional postman. She gives them poisons and helps them administer them in a way that doesn't arouse suspicion. I mean, secret poisoner, love that, I'm in. The other character in that timeline, it's a dual timeline. The other character is Liza, who is a 12-year-old scullery maid. The second timeline is present day. It's about Caroline, who comes to London on her wedding anniversary, and she shows up alone because her husband is a douchebag, and she found out the day before that he has been cheating on her. And so she takes what would have been their trip by herself. And when she gets there, she sees a local group of people who are at the Thames, and the tide has gone out, and they are searching the river bottom for historical artifacts or whatever they can find. That's where the 2 plots intersect. Caroline's plot doesn't really add much to the story. I think you could have taken it out altogether and it would not have been missed in the slightest. The Regency plot is pretty good. The characters had some problems. Like the personalities of the characters were fleshed out, you know, their backstories, their personal attributes and all that. That was good, but their voices were all pretty similar, which when you're spanning from the 1700s to the present day, that's not going to fly. No one in the 1700s is going to use the term adolescence because that word wasn't in use then. And at one point, Eliza, who is a scullery maid who was raised on the farm, refers to a cocoon as a papery encasement. That is completely out of character. Those words are not going to exit her speaking hole. So some details like that were jarring, but even when the vocabulary was okay, like the tone, the grammar, it was just all pretty modern, and it just really didn't work. So there were also some historical inaccuracies. I mean, if you're writing a book that takes place in the Regency era, you've got to, some parts of the book were well researched. Like, you can tell that the pharmacological parts, like the poisons and stuff, she did her homework on. The setting of London and what that would have been like was all right, but some other parts, like Nella is a female apothecary. As far as I know, and I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form, but in Regency England, apothecaries were a regulated trade. You had to be licensed, you had to go to school. And I seriously doubt very much that there were women apothecaries. Maybe she wasn't an official apothecary. I mean, the Lost Herbalist doesn't have the same ring, but... And it's a cool idea to have a, secret poisoning apothecary. I mean, I don't mean to sound pedantic, and I'm definitely not trying to pick on the author or ruin anybody's fun. That's absolutely not my intention. I read a book. This is my opinion on the book. Eliza is never going to go from being a scullery maid to a lady's maid overnight. She might work her way up over the years, but it's not going to just suddenly happen one day because reasons. and she's not going to be taught to read and write. I mean, she might be taught to read and write. Maybe she's definitely not going to be taught to read and write by her mistress so she can write letters for her. What? Or if she is, she should have bought a lottery ticket, just run out to the shops to get a Regency lotto ticket. And then when Eliza's mom brings her to London to find work as a domestic servant, she tells her, "In London, you can be whatever you desire." That's a completely modern sentiment. If you're part of the working classes in that era, that idea is not even going to be on your radar. Like, the class system held you in place. You were not going to rise above your station. Like, you were, pinned like a butterfly. I don't know. I don't know why somebody didn't catch these things. Anyway, I'm sure most people are just going to enjoy the story. I'm sorry, my dogs are like doing a 5K around the room. Sorry for the clicking and my phone going off and whatever. It's also garbage day, so we may get a little sample of that. Anyway, yeah. So most people are just going to enjoy the story. It's a popular book. It's a New York Times bestseller. It was like a Book of the Month Club book. It's got a ton of good reviews. I think Leanna gave it 5 stars, so whatever. You can take my opinion with a grain of salt. Okay, on to nonfiction. I haven't really read that much nonfiction. Since I did the Shelf Space readathon in July, that was so much fun, but I really got off the nonfiction track, so I'm trying to get back over there. Actually, I'm going to be doing nonfiction November, which is something that Olive over at A Book Olive does every year. I'll leave her stuff in the description box to see if you're interested. And if anybody wants to do buddy read of a nonfiction book, let me know. This is an oral history, so I can't really critique it, but I'll just tell you a little bit about the book. So, the worst slums in Europe in the first half of the 20th century, and even before that, were all through Ireland, especially in Dublin. Like, you had 15, 20, 30 people living in one room, houses which were literally falling apart. Like, the roof would collapse and they would kill, the tenants. There was no plumbing, no sanitation, barely enough food, no work, the whole 9 yards. And this obviously led to the myriad of problems you might expect. Vermin, disease, birth defects, alcoholism, high mortality rate, not to mention the utter desperation people felt. There is quite a bit of repetition in this book, but it's somewhat unavoidable since everyone pretty much lived in the same circumstances. If you're interested in how people got through that time, what it was like to live then, if you're interested in urban poverty or in Irish history, I recommend this book. I read 2 fantasy books this month. I read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I don't have anything new or interesting to say that's different from the hundreds of other reviews you've seen on BookTube. I like her prose. I had no problem with the second person narration. If I continue with the trilogy, I will read the paperback version instead of listening to the audio, because sometimes if a story is really big, I have, trouble with the audio. I just absorb the details better if I'm reading the paper version. So I also read City of Stairs. I heard about this from the Bookish Drummer. I mean, among other places. I think that's the first place I heard about it, though. This is a fantasy murder mystery. Stop right there. You had me at fantasy murder mystery. So I want to give you some backstory because I like backstory going into a book. I like to know what I'm getting into. So this world has 2 groups of people. Well, obviously it has more than 2 groups of people, but we're focused on 2 groups of people, and they're separated from each other by geography and also culture. So one group lives on the continent, and throughout their history, they had a bunch of gods, like 6 gods, who lived among the people and protected them from enemies and made sure that there was enough food so there was no famine or disease. And they also kind of were weirdly part of the physical infrastructure of the city. And they created a bunch of miracles, which aren't what we think of as miracles. They're different kinds of magical objects. So like a key you can put into any lock, and when you open the door, it opens into a tropical forest. Or a teapot that never runs out of hot tea. We don't get to see a lot of the miracles, sadly, because miracles and anything to do with the gods has been outlawed. So the other group of people live on Sepur, and they were enslaved by the continent for a long, long time. And then they finally revolted, and one Sepuri called the Kaj created this weapon which wiped out all the gods. He was just able to kill all the gods, and when that happened, the continent was instantly decimated. I mean, physically decimated, but also like the weather changed, plague swept the country, people were starving. You get the picture. Bands of not nice people roamed the land doing not nice things. And the Sepuris at that point usurped the government to try to sort of get things under control. And now when the book starts, they're running things, and they've made anything to do with the gods illegal. So, the people who used to be oppressed are kind of the oppressors now. So there is a smidgen of tension between these two people. There's a little resentment, and when the book starts, it's about 50 or so years after the destruction of the continent, and Professor Pangui, I think that's how you say his name, who sits on the governing body of the continent, has been murdered. So they assign an operative named Shara and her secretary Sigrid to investigate, and they are amazing. They are such an amazing team. You are going to love them. I don't want to talk about them because there's stuff that will be more enjoyable if you don't know about it going in. So there's this murder, and of course, things are more complicated what they seem. People aren't what they appear, so there's lots of intrigue and espionage and fun stuff like that. Not to mention the whole fantasy world aspect of it, so there's lots of fantastical elements, intertwined in the mystery. This book was great. The writing style was really good. Not too flowery, but just some nice imagery. I'm not really a visual reader. Like, I can see things, but they're sort of ghostly. Like, the settings of a book don't just fully bloom in my mind as I'm reading, but I could see a lot of this book, and the dialogue's really good. The pacing and structure really give the story a nice framework, so it's got some freedom to be creative because it's supported by that good pacing and structure. Sometimes the first book of fantasies, it just feels info-dumpy. I was really pleased that most of the information happens organically. So, this book isn't very long. It's only like 450 pages. So considering how much world has to be explained in so few pages, it was quite a feat. Like, you don't feel like you're having to read an instruction manual on how the world works, The only minor flaws I thought it had was one of the villains was a little cartoonish. He is a fanatic, but, that could be considered part of his character, but it was just like, the monologues, the inability to show anything other than anger. Also, there was no map. What? Maybe there'll be a map in book 2. So, very minor complaints. I'm not good at finishing series, but right away I put a hold on this at my library on book 2. So, put this on your TBR. If it's already there, move it up. All right, I think that's going to do it. That's a wrap, kids. I will leave all the relevant stuff in the description. Let me know if any of these books sounded interesting to you, or if you don't have anything to say, just leave me a skull emoji to let me know you stopped by. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I will see you soon. Bye.